Hello everyone, my name is Juan Carballal. I am the editor of Eurojuegos Buenos Aires in Argentina, and today I'll be making a solo playthrough of the game Breaking the Chains: War in the South China Sea by designer John Gorkowski and published in 2014 by Compass Games. As you may have noticed, English is not my first language, but if you bear with me, I'll try to make myself as clear as possible. We will be playing a scenario somewhat similar to the campaign game in the rules, but including the mini expansion counters and with all counters set up in the map, so you can see all the pieces in the map and how they drive strategic decisions for both sides. This first part of the playthrough includes the complete Black Ops, politics, transit phases, as well as the complete general quarters cycle of the first day. The first cycle, so sit down, relax and enjoy. The game starts at day 1 in the initial Black Ops phase. China has an initial counter pre-selected during setup. Now resolves it. It's the Persian play special operation, a classic opening. Mind that special operations by the game rules go after land attack cruise missile strikes, but as a simpler tweak of the rules I always do them first, no big deal. By Persian play, Iran and Pakistan gladly oblige China's request to make trouble in the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea to give US naval units on station. Therefore, US units cannot leave the Indian Ocean box unless and until the US plays the old Europe chit. Notice that I call both sides China and US. The game calls them something fancier, but for the sake of this gameplay, this is way simpler. After special operations, China conducts its cruise missile strikes. During this game, I will be using an optional rule, a variant slightly adapted to my own tastes. China will have anti-ship ballistic missiles because that is basically China's offset strategy, and if you don't have implemented the means to offset your adversary's advantages, why are you starting the war in the first place, right? So China has them. Oh, we don't have a war. Okay, so China has them and can use one every turn, which is a big deal, and you'll see why. I rolled 2d6s, so SSM Battery 3 will launch an anti-ship ballistic missile this turn. This changes from turn to turn in my rules. The range of these ballistic missiles is just ridiculous. Basically, you can target anything you want. So let's see what carrier to hit first. The Japanese carrier Hyuga is tempting. With only 19,000 tons, a single hit could take it down. He has an F-35 wing, which are the best fighters available for the Japanese, and it's the only one wing they have of them. So, but they can use the Akisuki destroyer anti-air area defense and the fighters combat air patrol to try to shoot the missile down. The thing is if undisturbed, it may take a couple of days for Japan to enter the war, and they probably will remain in range of the Chinese fighters nonetheless. So no. The American Nimitz carrier group heading for Taiwan is also a target to consider. After all, these ballistic missiles were made with them in mind. But with over 100,000 tons, these guys can take a lot of punishment before going down. On top of that, the carrier is surrounded with the Aegis air defense system and the best air-to-air fighters. So it's tough. Near the Spratly Islands, we have an unwelcomed visitor, the Russian fleet, and the carrier Admiral Kuznetsov. They are there exclusively to support their Vietnamese allies. The carrier is well defended, but will go down with a single hit, and that could considerably reduce the power projection of the Russians, especially considering many Vietnamese planes will be destroyed on their bases very soon. The Thai carrier Chitang is virtually a sitting duck, but for what it's worth, taking it down feels like an overkill. Finally, our Indian friends, the Vikrant, they must be taken down now that they are alone and vulnerable before they meet with the American Fifth Fleet in the Indian Ocean, from the Indian Ocean. Choices, important strategic choices. You'll have many of those in this game. Well, I'll probably hate myself later, but my target of choice is the Russian carrier Kuznetsov. Until other carriers arrive, China wants to establish a superiority over the South China Sea, so that Russian jets have to go. Now meet the Dongfeng 26, also known as the Guam Express. Once launched, it cannot be intercepted mid-course, but until the last seconds, incoming at blinding speed. That's 5 to 10 times the speed of sound, we don't know yet for sure. Russian fleet sounds the alarm. Nakimov coordinates the anti-air missile defense. The roll is an 8 plus the missile's anti-ship score of 6. The interception fails. The missile rolls 6 to evade fighter cover over the target, succeeding. This is, by the way, another of my house rules. I think Cap should be able to hunt down incoming missiles. It rarely happens, so never mind, just for the record. You will see me trying. The Russian carrier Admiral Kuznetsov is hit and destroyed, and its air group goes down with it. This will be remembered as a bitter day for the Russian fleet. China now performs its regular land attack cruise missile strikes, starting from SSM Battery 1. I give each battery a one-step attack per day instead of the game's brutal 3 steps at once from the start, and you're out of the rest for the rest of the game. That mechanic is just not fun for me. All missiles fly off on turn 1, and that's it. Nothing you can do, nothing you could have done. There's no counterplay. This way, one per turn for the whole game is how I do it, and this way I prefer better. So SSM-1 fires and will be trying to hit those Vietnamese fighters sitting at the bases in Hanoi. With a roll of 6, missiles evade a local combat air patrol, and with a roll of 7, inflict 1 hit on the Su-30 Vietnamese fighter wing. Now SSM-2 will make a similar attack. With a roll of 8, the cruise missiles evade local cap, and with a roll of 7 plus the cruise missiles score of 5 against the default defense of 8, the strike causes a second step loss for the Vietnamese fighters. Now it is the turn of SSM Battery 4 to attack. Even at a distance of 8, the missile can plot a course without crossing any area air defenses, but with a roll of 2, the cruise missiles fail to evade local combat air patrols and are destroyed in flight. I was unexpected, and this is why I love my variants. SSM Battery 5 will repeat the attack over the air bases in Ho Chi Minh City. At near maximum distance of 11, excuse me, the missiles can still plot a course without any air defense coverage. With a roll of 6, the missiles manage to evade local air patrols, and they inflict a step of damage to the Su-30 fighters in the runway. Now SSM Battery 6 is further to the north, but can still trace an undefended course at its maximum range of 12 to the insulting Vietnamese airfield set up in the Spratlys. With a roll of 9, the cruise missiles managed to evade local combat air patrols, and with a roll of 5, plus the missiles air-to-ground score of 5, they managed to inflict 1 step of damage, destroying the single-step Vietnamese unit of Su-27 fighters. Now, SSM-7 and SSM-8 further north are really meant to strike in the East China Sea. But even if the United States will surely go berserk over this whole Vietnam being bombarded deal, if China doesn't strike US forces in Japanese soil, it would take another day for Japan or two to follow its American ally and be drawn into the war. And China could really use that time to its advantage. So both remaining Chinese batteries will try to shake the armor units defending the Vietnamese capital. Now let's zoom into the action. The first target is the Vietnamese armor unit defending the northern approach to Hanoi. The cruise missiles might be intercepted by the beaten down fighters in Hanoi, and this is yet another house rule of mine. Cap has a range of 1. Yeah, big deal. Breaking the chains is a sandbox game. Yeah, you are expected to try out your own rules and scenarios, so yeah, no, deal with it. This battered Su-30 scramble to intercept. They will do so with a -2 penalty on their air-to-air score for their 2 steps of damage, meaning it's even more unlikely they could intercept anything. Moreover, and this is interesting, there could be a J-31 fighter squadron from Nanning in combat patrol. So the 2 caps would fight each other first. Again, this doesn't happen by the rules of the game, but I love it, so it's happening. Besides, those 2 squadrons will face each other anyways, so they might as well do it now, and you get to see some Top Gun action. So let me have a sip of water. Vietnamese Su-30 combat air patrol is launched to intercept the incoming cruise missiles. Chinese J-31 combat air patrol is launched to intercept the Vietnamese fighters. The J-31's higher stealth score gains than the initiative. So with a roll of 7 plus the air-to-air score of 4, the J-31 failed to intercept the Su-30s. With another roll of 7 -2 for damage, the Su-30s failed to intercept the J-31s. Now with a roll of 8, the Vietnamese plane failed to intercept the incoming cruise missiles. So there was bad weather or something, I don't know. So the cruise missiles roll for impact, getting a 10, which results in the armor unit being shocked. And that is like half of a step of damage. You still need to finish them off. The last cruise missiles target the 45th Artillery Regiment and Su-30 fighters from Hanoi again scramble to intercept them. But this time the Chinese will use their surface-to-air missiles to engage them. The SAM battery rolls doubles, so inflicting a hit to the air squadron, and that hit finishes them off. With a roll of 8 plus the missile's ground attack score of 5, they hit and shock the artillery unit. Now, there are also the naval cruise missile platforms, but you want to go easy on those because they generally can only fire once before they need to return to port to rearm. But in this case we will use 3 naval cruise missile strikes to finish off some particularly remaining targets. The Type 52 Lu Hu class destroyer will try to shock the Vietnamese 24th Artillery Regiment north of Hanoi. With a roll of 5 plus their ground attack score of 5, the missiles overcome the default defense of 8 and manage to shock the artillery regiment. The other 2 destroyers will try to finish off the Vietnamese Su-30 wing, the fighter wing. With a roll of 5, the first volleys of cruise missiles managed to evade the local air patrols, and with a roll of 8, they hit the Vietnamese fighters for a second step of damage. Now, the second volley of missiles is inbound. A roll of 12 allows them to evade local cap, but with a roll of 3 plus the missile's ground attack score of 5, they fail to cause damage to the target. Those guys survived 4 cruise missile attacks. Those are some tough motherfuckers. Okay. That ends the Black Ops phase for China. Now the US player has to assess what the Chinese strategy is and how to counter it. China has only attacked Vietnam and its allies, Russia. That will keep potential US allies from reacting in turn 1. Maybe China is going for a limited war strategy. Just by taking control of Hanoi and the Spratlys, China has enough victory point excess to win the game. The targeting of land forces around Hanoi indicates that a land invasion might occur, and the targeting of air assets in the South China Sea may be clearing the way for naval forces heading for the disputed islands. Or is it just a diversionary attack? The Nimitz is the only carrier group around and a vital asset for the defense of Taiwan and the Senkaku Islands. If it sails south, the Japanese will be left on their own, and the way to Guam would be open. On the other hand, if Nimitz doesn't sail south, the rest of the potential US allies might be taken out one by one before another carrier group from San Diego or the Indian Ocean arrives to prevent it. One thing is for sure, if Nimitz is going in, those cruise missile launchers have to go, especially since they can launch the anti-ship ballistic missiles that just sank the Russian carrier Admiral Kuznetsov. So the US will focus on destroying as many of those with naval cruise missiles of its own, eventually. But first, the US sets up the Old Europe special operation for the next day, resorting to its European allies to free its naval units in the Persian Gulf. The US needs to get the 5th Fleet carrier group to the South China Sea as soon as possible. Since the US starts the game as neutral and was not attacked, it cannot perform any cruise missile land attacks this first day, but the Russian fleet can. And at this point both Russia and Vietnam are at war with China, so let's zoom in to that Russian fleet. The battleship Nakhimov, the destroyer Udaloy, and the cruiser Slava all have cruise missiles. They will be targeting the air squadrons in the Paracels and Sanya. A success on the attack on the Paracels is important, because if it fails, the fighters from Woody Island in combat air patrol could intercept the second and the third volleys of missiles directed to Sanya. Those 2 volleys into Sanya will still have to overcome air patrols from the Chinese carrier Shilang and air patrols and SAM coverage over the target, so this is not an easy mission. But the Russians want payback for what happened to Admiral Kuznetsov, so the attack is authorized. With a roll of 10, the cruise missiles managed to evade combat air patrols from Woody Island, and a roll of 6 allows them to destroy the G-31's one-step air squadron on the ground. Good. The second volley of Russian cruise missiles evades the combat air patrol from the carrier Shilang with a roll of 7, but a roll of 8 plus the missile's ground attack score of 5 is not enough to penetrate the area defense surface-to-air missiles. The final volley of Russian cruise missiles managed to evade Shilang's combat air patrol, but again the incoming missiles are shot down by the defensive SAM batteries. Those guys are good. So it looks like there's little payback for the Russians. So in the politics phase of the first day, one side so far only controls China, and the other side controls Vietnam and its allies, Russia, with the caveat that I will treat Russia only as an ally of Vietnam, meaning it will shoot any other air units or missiles entering its airspace, even US ones. If any of you ever played the ancient game of Chaturanga, you know how this works. Chaturanga, by the way, is an ancient ancestor of chess, played by 4 players in 2 teams, but team members cannot place their kings where they can be captured by the ally. So they fight together by need to remain out of reach of each other. Get it? Okay. Same here. The big news of this politics phase is that the US declares war on China on the basis of its aggression against Vietnam and Russia, meaning now US forces are allowed to maneuver and engage Chinese forces. Now the transit phase starts. The US player can schedule units from outside of the map to enter play in different ports of destination. Since China made its Persian Play special operation, the US cannot commit the Eisenhower battle group to the theater yet. But it can mobilize units from Hawaii or San Diego. Units from Hawaii would get there faster, but the US needs to get some more air and naval muscle into the fight first. So the whole carrier battle group will set sail from Guam. Naval Task Force 1, comprising the Gerald Ford and Lincoln carriers, along with the air groups and destroyer escorts, will reach Guam by day 10. The carriers themselves could reach Guam 3 days earlier, but I don't want to risk them entering the theater of operations by themselves. I might regret that, but one can only imagine what the scenario would look like a week from now. Naval Task Force 2, comprising amphibious transports carrying the 1st Marines Division, will reach Guam on day 16. So I place the markers for San Diego Task Forces, TF1 for the carriers group and TF2 for the Marines. Now, forces in Hawaii I will split into 2. Task Force 3 will comprise airborne forces and a full F-35 wing, and Task Force 4 will comprise amphibious forces accompanied by the nuclear submarine Washington. The Airborne Task Force 3 will reach Guam tomorrow, but it will take until day 14 for the Amphibious Task Force 4 to arrive. I wonder if they will be on time to make a difference. Anyways, let's start with the first General Quarters cycle and get this thing in motion. China will make all its air moves first, then the US will follow. This should be short. China is only lost a minor air squadron in the Paracels, but the initial setup still holds. However, we will use the Seoul Chinese transport aircraft to get some air mobile forces into the paracels. After all, these are victory locations, so China wants them under undisputed control. So the Y-8 flies south with a load of airborne troops for the Woody Island airfield and back to Sanyang. The unit gets a recovery marker, so it cannot be used again during this cycle. Now, the US has a number of aircraft sitting idle in Guam, so we better step them into the front line. But there's a catch. With a maximum ferry range of 24 and the Philippines still neutral, the US can only reach Vietnam via Okinawa, and that means at least 2 days and arguably a hard time finding a clear course close to the Chinese mainland. Only a small squadron can reach the Vietnamese airfield in the Spratlys, but we know what happens to the last guys there, right? So don't expect to find many volunteers to join. Effectively, the US needs the Philippines as a staging point to fight in the South China Sea. It is really hard to do from Okinawa or Guam. So China needs to take a very deep thought about who to attack and when. In any case, the US will advance some of its aircraft nonetheless, because America! 135 Wing will transit to Okinawa to help the Japanese and Taiwan in the East China Sea, while a small F-35 squadron will land in the Truong Salon, from then on known as Trump's Saloon airfield. Both squadrons get a recovery marker and will not be activated again during this cycle. That ends the air movements phase. Now onto the naval movements. Again, China performs all its naval movements, followed by the US. Now China wants to be aggressive and push out into the sea before its enemies gang up against her. So we'll move out and make our adversaries feel the chains breaking. Mind that Chinese blue water navy vessels can move 1x per cycle in open sea, but half that much in coastal areas, whereas the brown water navy can move once per cycle in coastal areas, but half as much in the open sea. The unit is assigned with a marker when out of element. Flat hull amphibious transports always move 1x per cycle, so they are never out of element. In the Gulf of Tonkin we are going to see some naval action, but overall the Chinese Navy will be moving south. In the Spratlys, the invisible Chinese submarines will try to shadow and ambush the Russian fleet. One way I do hidden submarine movement is by making subs move by the edge of the axis, meaning it can be in any of the 3 adjacent axes. I left it out for this playthrough, that house rule, but I highly recommend it, so comment if you are interested in using it and I'll tell you about it. It's very simple actually. The whole Chinese Navy coming out of the ocean. That must be a frightful sight. Let's continue with the US naval movements. In the East China Sea we only have a Zumwalt, but this guy can really take care of himself. The real question here is, where will the Nimitz go? Well, the answer is south, or at least south of Taiwan, also securing the Philippines and threatening the flank of the Chinese Blue Water Navy if it decides to head for the Spratlys. But the submarines will keep heading north. They will remain unseen but threatening. Even in war there is deterrence. Meanwhile, in Guam, the U.S. Illinois will accompany the heavier elements of the 3rd Marines as they approach the theater of operations. Maybe they could rendezvous with the Australians in a few more days. From Singapore, USS Monsieur and USS Freedom will sail to the Spratlys, but USS Little Rock will remain in station. As for the Vietnamese Navy, they are outnumbered and outclassed by the Chinese, so they will try to work out a way to take the maximum advantage from their allies, initially by using the Russian fleet as cover, but also if they can force a Chinese vessel into the interest zone of India. That will draw India to their side, and they need any help they can get to hold off the Chinese until the American carriers show up. The Russian fleet heads directly north, trying to close in for a decisive battle against the Chinese. Their anti-ship missiles have extraordinary ranges, but they need to get in range fast, because they are out of air cover. Here, we'll maneuver the submarines to set up their ambush in the Western Pass. Meanwhile, in the Gulf of Tonkin, the Vietnamese units will try to be as annoying as they can. The other nations are neutral, so this is how the map looks like after all naval movements have been made. Now finally, onto the naval engagement. Game rules tells me to roll for initiative, but whatever. China starts and then we'll switch back and forth. China declares an engagement against X2 sector, where the destroyer USS Zumwalt is. Until the US coalition builds up, US vessels will have an evasive doctrine to try to avoid engagements they don't initiate themselves. Excuse me. Now, the initiative... No, wait. With a roll of 10, plus the ship stealth score of 3, plus a distance of 3 to the nearest Chinese radar illuminating the X, that's a total of 16, which is over 11. So the stealth destroyer succeeds in evading detection, and the engagement is foregone. Now the initiative passes to the US, and will try to target the destroyer Hangzhou in XU2. The destroyer tries to evade and rolls a 5 plus its stealth score of 0 plus its distance to the US radar of 3. The result is an 8, so it fails evasion and its position is fixed. The US declares it will use 2 F-18 squadrons to engage the Chinese destroyer. The fighters will have to cross Liaoning carrier combat air patrols, the destroyer's anti-air missiles defense. Moreover, China will commit 2 J-31 fighter squadrons to intercept the incoming attackers. So, yes, this is how a simple engagement looks like in Breaking the Chains. You are not supposed to move the counters when you resolve an engagement, but I will do so it's easier to follow what's happening. We have the US F-18s inbound and the Chinese interceptors going after them. First, we will resolve air-to-air combat, since both attackers and defenders have the same stealth and anti-air scores. Combat is simultaneous. The J-31 interceptors roll an 8 plus their air-to-air score of 4, that's 12, so they score a hit on the F-18s. The Hornets roll a 4 plus the air-to-air score of 4. It's not enough to damage the Chinese planes. The other J-31 interceptors roll an 11 plus their anti-air score, they hit the other incoming F-18. The Hornets roll a 7 plus their anti-air score is not enough to damage the Chinese planes. Now notice that by the game rules this attack should have wiped out the whole second F-18 wing, since both units are 3 steps, meaning about 75 planes each. But as a house rule, again, I limit all combat to 1-step losses, since I cannot envision 75 planes attacking a single destroyer, much less 150 planes dogfighting each other at the same time. So if you want to bet 150 first generation fighters on a roll of a couple of dice on the first hour of the war, you are free to play the rule as intended, not me. Now the interceptors return to base, and one of the inbound Hornets meets the combat air patrol from the Chinese carrier Liaoning. Both squadrons have the same stealth, and since the F-18s have suffered a step of damage, both squadrons also now have the same anti-air rating, so combat happens simultaneously. The Chinese roll a 4 and miss, and the Americans roll an 8 plus 3 air-to-air is 11, so they also miss. The 2 squadrons finally reach its target, and due to the superior stealth score, they strike first with their anti-ship missiles. The US rolls a 5 for the first volley of missiles, plus the F-18 score of 4. The attack is unable to penetrate the ship's air defense. The second US roll is an 8 plus a score of 4. The F-18 hit the Chinese destroyer for a step of damage. The destroyer gets a damage marker, and both fighter squadrons return to base and are given a recovery marker. Almost forgot, the Chinese planes launched to intercept are also given a recovery marker. The Chinese still have the CJ-31 from the carrier Liaoning, but since China has decided not to attack Japan this turn, and the US bases are heavily defended, the US has the P-8 Poseidon long-range maritime patrol aircraft, but with that CJ-31's air cover, it's not safe for them to roam around. So let's look elsewhere. Testing the enemy air defenses, China announces an engagement in sector W9, where American ally Burke class destroyer Jones is located. But with a roll of 8 plus a stealth score of 2 plus a distance of 6 to the nearest enemy detection platform, the destroyer manages to evade the engagement. The F-35 from Nimitz will hold for now, since approaching the Chinese mainland could mean 4 or 5 squadrons scrambling to intercept them. Russia announces an attack on sector N16, where a Chinese submarine is located. The submarine tries to evade, rolling a 3, which at a distance of 0 is not good enough at all, even with a stealth score of 4, so the submarine is detected and will be engaged. The Russians will attack with the Nakhimov and will call for air support from the Vietnamese allies. The fighters from the Chinese carrier Shilang will try to offer some air cover at long range. Let's zoom in into the action. As the Chinese fighters approach the target area, they encounter the Nakhimov's area air defense. With a roll of 11, the battleship fails to impact the bandits. Now it's air-to-air combat between the fighter jets. The Chinese have the first strike because of the higher stealth score. With a roll of 8 plus an air combat score of just 2, because they are at long range, the Chinese fighters failed to inflict damage on the Vietnamese planes. With a roll of 7 plus an air combat score of just 2, because they have 2 steps of damage, the Su-30s also failed to damage the Chinese fighters. Since the engagement was initiated by the Russians, the Chinese submarine cannot make a surprise attack. So we go to the next phase, the anti-ship missile attack. Both the J-31 planes and the submarine will attack the Nakhimov. With a roll of 6 plus a score of 3, the submarine fails to overcome the battleship's missile defenses, but with a roll of 9 plus a score of 4, the fighters manage to score a hit, and that is why you want a decent cap or cover with you at all times. Now we start the anti-submarine warfare phase. Both Vietnamese fighters and the Russian ship will attack the Chinese nuclear submarine. The fighters roll a 7 plus an anti-submarine score of 2. They hit the Chinese submarine for 11 damage. Then the Nakhimov rolls an 8 plus its score of 2. The Chinese submarine takes a second hit and is sunk. Now, let me make a break here. Why on earth would you put a missile defense score of 0 in subs when you have to roll 8 or more to hit them? I don't know, it's mind-boggling. Both air units participating in the battle beyond their cap range receive a recovery marker. Now, before being surprised, China announces an attack over sector L12, where a Vietnamese Kilo-class submarine is in. The sub-captain is not crazy, so he will try to evade. With a roll of 7 plus a stealth score of 7, the submarine evades the attack undetected. And this is how these small diesel submarines can be really annoying to a surface fleet. Vietnam announces an attack against sector J8 because it's happening one way or the other, so better get done with it. China will throw everything they have nearby: the frigate, 3 fighter and 2 bomber squadrons, going against the Vietnamese missile boat and the shocked armor and artillery regiments. The engagement starts with the Vietnamese missile boat facing off the Chinese frigate and 3 fighter squadrons, with the Chinese firing first due to the higher anti-surface scores. The roll of 10, 7, 6 and 6 are enough to finish off the missile boat. Then the Chinese frigate will make a gun attack against the Vietnamese ground forces, particularly the armor unit. A roll of 11 plus the gun score of 2 overcomes the default defense of 11 and causes a second shock result, which is transformed into a step of damage. Next comes the air-to-ground attacks, with 5 Chinese squadrons hitting both Vietnamese ground units. With 5 rolls modified by the respective ground score, only 3 of them hit the targets, but are enough to shock the armor unit again and give a second shock to the artillery unit that changes to a step of damage. All the units taking part on the attack get the correspondent recovery or fired marker. China announces an attack on sector I-11. The Vietnamese Tarantul missile boat will try to evade. With a roll of 10 plus a stealth score of 2, the Tarantul manages to disguise itself from the Chinese. The US passes again, but still having some spare air power in Sanya, China announces an attack over sector L14, trying to nail another one of the Vietnamese missile boats. The boat tries to evade detection but only rolls a 4, so its exact position is pinpointed by the attackers. China commits its 2 remaining air squadrons in Sanya and the Kunming destroyer to the engagement. On the other side, the missile boat is on its own. With the same stealth as the enemy, but a better anti-ship attack score, the Chinese destroyer and fighter squadron fire first. Rolls of 11 and 9 plus their 3 anti-ship scores are enough to beat the boat's missile defense of 7. The boat receives 2 hits and is destroyed. Both air squadron and the destroyer receive the corresponding fired and recovery markers. Now, there's a reason you don't want to send all your multi-role fighters from Sanya, because even if your interceptors in Hong Kong can give you a very good coverage, they don't cover the paracells completely. Minor spoiler here, but this is an attack course for a P8 Poseidon from Okinawa, acting at double range half attack configuration for a range of 20 axes. If you know this already, there's a 50-50 chance you find out the hard way when that hideous god of the oceans came out of nowhere to sink your precious ships. So be warned, it happens. But since China thinks there's not much of a threat so far, it will go for another attack into Hanoi. I wonder if these Chinese pilots ever played Downtime from Lee Bricombe Wood. Who knows. The J-31 just flies there unopposed, and with a roll of 9 plus its ground attack score of 2 barely misses the opportunity to shock the Vietnamese ground unit. It returns to base and is given a recovery marker. Well, I think that's it for the first cycle. Mind that what changes from now on, at least for the 5 remaining cycles of the first day, is that those recovery markers, well, they don't come off so easily, and likely a little more than half of them will remain there where they are, since you have to roll more than 8 to recover your planes. That's another tweak you can make to the rules. What countries recover their planes faster so as to go on more sorties per day. Again, the flavor of the sandbox, add as much as you like. But bear in mind that with 6 cycles per day, each with a naval movement, the Chinese Navy can land on the island in the first chain and the Spratlys on a single day. Next cycles are a complete slaughter and you will still have at least 3 or 4 more days before the next American carrier group arrives. I prefer to play up to 4 cycles per day, but again, house rules, do as you like. That's it for this first episode of the playthrough. I need to take a little break since doing this is a ton of work, but if there's enough interest, please leave a comment and I'll give it a thought. In any case, hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks to John Gorkowski for designing such an interesting game, to Compass Games for publishing it, to Mark Mahaffey for the beautiful map, to Dave Deitch for producing the original Vassal module, which I modified, and to Christopher Moeller for the new art on the counters, which is spectacular in comparison. My name is Juan Carballal. I'm the editor of Eurojuegos Buenos Aires in Argentina. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.